The first time I walked into a bank barn near Berlin, in Holmes County, in the middle of August, I expected trapped heat. What I found instead changed something in me. The gravel snapped under my boots. The afternoon air felt heavy and metallic, like every Ohio summer I thought I understood. Cicadas screamed from the hedge line. Sunlight sat white on the tin roof. I opened the lower door and waited for that usual wall of barn heat. It never came. What hit my face felt wrong. The air was cool, not refrigerated, not sharp, just calm, dry, and steady, like the inside of a cave that had learned patience. I could smell cut hay, damp limestone, and old wood. I could hear swallows in the rafters. I could not hear a compressor. I could not hear a fan motor fighting for its life. So I stood there. 5 full minutes. I kept looking for the machine. I looked for ductwork, vents, a condenser pad, a thermostat, anything. Nothing explained what my skin was feeling. I stood there for 11 minutes looking for the expected thing. It was not there. And that was when I understood I had been wrong about everything. I had believed cooling meant machinery. I had believed comfort meant electricity first, physics second. I had believed summer control arrived in a box with coils, refrigerant, and monthly payments. Standing in that lower room near Berlin, with sunlight burning the road outside, I realized something bigger. The oldest cooling system on that property was not a machine at all. It was the ground itself, trained to do the work first. That realization stayed with me. On my second visit, I arrived just after a thunderstorm. The field still steamed. Wet heat hung over the lane like a tarp. Inside that lower room, the air stayed stubbornly even. My glasses did not fog. My shirt stopped clinging to my back. Water dripped from the eaves outside, yet the space around that pipe mouth felt composed. On my third visit, winter answered a different question. The yard had frozen hard. The horse trough wore a skin of ice. When the intake air came through the line, it was not warm, but it was no longer cruel. That mattered. You know the difference between cold air and punishing air the second it touches your lungs. The pipe took the punishment out of it. That is when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Summer peaks flattened, winter edges softened. The building stopped fighting the weather head-on and started negotiating with it. Quietly, patiently, the way old buildings used to. I followed the smell of cool stone to the rear wall and found a pipe mouth screened with stainless mesh. No branding, no glossy housing, just a clean 4-inch opening, a simple register, and a draft so constant it felt deliberate. The floor beneath it stayed dry. The old man beside me watched my face and smiled before I asked a single question. I asked where the unit was. Eli laughed once. Then Eli tapped the wall with 2 fingers and said, "You keep looking for a machine because a machine is what somebody trained you to expect." The sentence landed harder than the heat outside. Eli did not sound impressed by it. Eli sounded tired of explaining it. I went back in October, then again in February, then once more the next July. I kept expecting the trick to fall apart once the season changed. It did not. In summer, the draft stayed cooler than the yard. In winter, the incoming air lost the brutal edge that makes old houses miserable. Same principle, same earth, same silence. I have been going back to Holmes County every season for 3 years. And every time I find something the building industry forgot on purpose. Here is the promise. Give the earth 20 to 40 feet of smooth pipe and 1 clean path into your house. You can knock brutal summer air down into the low 70s with materials that cost less than 1 service call. In some soils, 8 feet down, the temperature barely moves. It sits between 54 and 56 degrees Fahrenheit, while your condenser outside screams through a 95-degree afternoon. And yes, this works, even if your house was built 50 years ago. Stay with me. Because what I found in Holmes County uses the same physics the Persians used to cool desert air roughly 2,500 years ago. The science is embarrassingly simple. The United States Department of Energy says shallow ground temperatures usually stay between 40 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on latitude and season. That means the soil beneath your feet changes slower than the air above your roof. Air spikes, earth buffers. Your house already knows this. Your basement proves it every summer. You already trust this principle in smaller ways. You reach for a cast iron skillet because iron holds heat longer than thin metal. You wrap a bottle in a wet cloth because evaporation steals energy from the surface. You step into a cellar because mass and shade tame the day before your body has time to complain. An earth tube combines all of that common sense and gives the moving air a colder memory. Oak Ridge National Laboratory focuses on ground-coupled systems at a larger scale, and the numbers tell the same story. Ground source systems use the earth as a heat sink in summer and a heat source in winter. The United States Department of Energy says inside components in geothermal systems can last up to 24 years, while the buried loop can last more than 50 years. Different hardware, same thermal logic. Let the stable ground carry the load first. Natural Resources Canada put numbers on that principle in 2018. In a Toronto field study, buried earth tubes warmed winter intake air by as much as 14.3 degrees Celsius and cooled summer air by about 6.8 degrees Celsius before that air ever reached the main system. No refrigerant, no compressor cycle, just heat moving toward equilibrium through buried pipe. That number matters more than it sounds. If outdoor air arrives at 93 degrees and your line removes 6.8 degrees Celsius, you have already stripped roughly 12.2 degrees Fahrenheit out of the problem before your room even sees it. That is like starting a race halfway to the finish line while your conventional unit still has to run the whole track. Every degree you remove early is a degree your paid equipment never has to fight later. Think about your car radiator. You do not create coolness inside it. You move heat from one place to another faster than your engine can keep it. An underground pipe does the same thing in reverse. You drag hot air through cooler soil, and the earth absorbs the penalty. That is not a trick. That is thermodynamics. In published earth tube studies, the coefficient of performance clears 2.0 with modest fan power. In plain language, you get more than 2 units of cooling effect for every 1 unit of electrical input moving the air. Compare that with a small window unit that often burns 900 to 1,400 watts to force the same room back under control. One uses the ground as a heat sink. One tries to overpower the day. Nobody told you. Not your builder, not your contractor, not the man who sold you a bigger condenser. That gap represents a massive market in equipment, refrigerant, replacement parts, and service every year. And that is why you have never heard of this. I felt the proof before I understood it. In Berlin, outside Mount Hope, and again near Strasbourg in Lancaster County, I kept stepping from hard summer light into rooms that felt 10 to 15 degrees calmer. There was no usual mechanical noise, no startup surge, no hot exhaust, no panic cycle when a cloud moved, just the soft pressure of air arriving from ground that refused to join the weather. Lydia gave me another piece of it. Lydia said the trick was never to ask one feature to do the whole job. Shade handled one part, thick walls handled another, night air handled another. The buried line handled the part most people now hand to a compressor. That stacking of small advantages is what old farm buildings did so well. Nothing flashy, nothing branded, just one quiet decision helping the next. One afternoon I asked Jacob why the pipe opening sat so high above the yard and why the run stayed straight. Jacob pointed toward the lane and said, "Water is the enemy, not dirt. Keep the pipe smooth, keep the slope true, and the earth will do the rest." Jacob said the method had been in Jacob's family for 4 generations. Jacob tied it to farm habits that reached back to people who came from the Palatinate and Alsace before the modern cooling business existed. That history is not folklore. The Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission's Lancaster Plain Agricultural Context, published in 2008, describes vaulted cellars and spring houses as essential cool storage spaces on Pennsylvania German farms. Penn State's agricultural history research says spring houses and root cellars supported dairying, preservation, and daily household work across the state long before refrigeration. I also kept coming back to one blunt detail from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission's Root Cellar Field Guide. Below frost level, those spaces hold around 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. That is not nostalgia. That is a measurable thermal fact. That knowledge never disappeared. It was written out of the manual. It was waiting. Now step back further. The buried pipe is not a weird Amish trick. It is a branch on a very old tree. Once you see that tree, you start noticing the same pattern everywhere. People living under pressure do not waste energy. People living with long winters or brutal summers learn to let mass, moisture, shade, and air movement cooperate. Once those pieces lock together, the building stops behaving like a thin shell and starts behaving like a climate device. In Yazd, Persian builders paired bad gears with kanat-fed air paths centuries before compressors existed. Air passed over cool subterranean water channels and entered living spaces already tempered by earth and stone. In the Roman world, buried storage rooms and thick masonry below grade kept food, wine, and occupied spaces dramatically steadier than the streets above. In some Roman villas, basement storage and water cisterns sat beneath thick masonry that flattened the midday swing above. Different materials. Same answer. You see it again in Korea. Ondal is remembered for winter heat, but the deeper lesson sits underneath it. Use the mass below the floor before you burn fuel above it. You see it in the Native American Southwest as well, where semi-subterranean rooms and thick earthen walls flattened violent day-to-night temperature swings. Nobody needed a trade show to discover that. The earth taught it. The Persians did not read this in a textbook. The Persians figured it out the way all real knowledge gets discovered, by paying attention to what the earth was already doing. The Amish did not need a laboratory to know the lower room felt different. Repetition taught the lesson. Seasons confirmed it. Silence made it obvious. Every civilization that mastered extreme condition arrived at the same answer independently. The Amish never forgot. They carried it from the Palatinate to Pennsylvania and Ohio roughly 280 years ago. They kept building it because it worked. They kept building it because nobody in those communities needed permission to do what made sense. Now comes the part that should make you angry. In May 1922, at the Rivoli Theater in New York, Willis Carrier publicly debuted the centrifugal chiller that made large-scale mechanical cooling cheaper and more reliable. 4 years later, Carrier and the broader cooling industry pushed home comfort as a purchasable machine, not a building habit. By 1929, homeroom coolers had reached the market. By 1947, the United States Department of Energy says 43,000 home units sold in a single year. Buried air tempering threatened every future compressor sale, every refrigerant refill, and every replacement cycle in a market now worth $16.43 billion a year in residential HVAC alone. The suppression did not happen with one dramatic ban. It happened through definitions, standards, financing, and omission. The cleanest example sits inside ANSI/ASHRAE Standard 62.2-2010, Section 4.1, a mechanical exhaust system, supply system, or combination thereof shall be installed for each dwelling unit. That sentence did not merely describe ventilation. That sentence standardized a paid appliance pathway. Once model codes and builder training wrapped whole house fresh air around mechanical language, site-built earth tempering moved from normal practice to strange exception. Before that sentence, omission had already done decades of work. Post-war builders copied the fastest repeatable template. Magazines sold the fantasy of sealed, effortless comfort. Mortgage systems rewarded standardized houses. Trade groups trained contractors around equipment categories, not around passive layers that made equipment smaller or unnecessary. That is how knowledge disappears in America. Not with bonfires, with forms, manuals, bids, and approved details. That knowledge never disappeared. It was set aside. It was waiting. The people who kept it were the people least invested in buying the new machine every 15 years. The named allies are not mysterious. House Beautiful and House and Home sold the cooled lifestyle in the 1950s. ASHRAE's own industry history says those magazines advertised the cool new convenience. The Federal Housing Administration financed the post-war house form that absorbed those products at scale. Carrier, Frigidaire, and General Electric sold the boxes that completed the picture. Media sold the dream. Government financed the shell. Industry filled the shell with equipment. An entire field of knowledge disappeared from architecture schools, building codes, and contractor habit. Not because it failed, because it was not profitable. You can watch the continuation in real time. ASHRAE 62.2 first appeared in 2003 as the first national residential ventilation standard for low-rise buildings. By the 2021 International Residential Code, whole house mechanical ventilation language had become routine. During the same era, the Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute reported $964,622 in federal lobbying expenditures in 2022 alone. Money follows standards. Standards follow money. Every mandatory powered pathway protects sales, inspections, parts, and replacement markets. Read the code language beside the spending, and the pattern becomes obvious. When a solution can be factory certified, inspected, replaced, and financed, it moves to the center of the book. When a solution relies on soil, slope, shade, masonry, and judgment, it drifts to the margins. Not because it failed, because marginless knowledge makes weak quarterly reports. The residential HVAC market in the United States was worth $16.43 billion in 2023. Every passive alternative installed is one compressor, one service contract, and one future replacement that never gets sold. Now, if you already own a house and you're thinking this only applies to people with land, stay with me. Because this next part is specifically for you. You don't need to tear up your foundation, rip out your existing system, or buy equipment. You need one thing they already have or can easily get: a yard, a drill, a bottle, a weekend. Here is the simplest version I trust. Start with one cooling run, not 5. Pick the shadiest side of your yard and bury a single smooth wall pipe 18 to 30 feet long. Use 4-inch SDR 35 sewer pipe or 4-inch HD PE drainage pipe with a smooth interior, not corrugated flex. Bury the run 6 to 8 feet deep where your soil stays stable. Hold a steady 2% slope back toward a drain point or daylight outlet so condensate never sits. If your yard is tiny, shorten the prototype to 18 feet and treat it as a room cooler, not a whole house miracle. If your yard gives you more room, go to 30 or 36 feet and keep every turn broad. I prefer two 22.5-degree bends over one tight 90. I want the line easy to inspect and easy to rinse. I also want the trench at least 5 feet away from septic lines and well heads. Clean air in, clean water nearby. No guesswork. At the intake, keep the opening 24 to 36 inches above grade. Add a stainless insect screen, a hooded cap, and a simple filter box. Wrap the buried run in woven geotextile fabric where your soil stays wet, and bed the pipe in 3 to 4 inches of washed 3/4-inch drain rock before backfill. Where the pipe rises near the house, switch to 4-inch Schedule 40 PVC for the last vertical section and seal joints with solvent cement and exterior mastic. If you can, set a clean-out tee at the low end with a threaded cap. That fitting costs $7 to $14 and saves you real trouble later. I also like a short condensate leg filled with coarse gravel below the tee, especially in heavy clay. In sandy ground, a daylight outlet works better. In either case, I want every drop to have somewhere to go besides sitting in the pipe waiting to turn your good idea into a swamp. Corrugated pipe is not optional. Corrugated pipe causes standing water, biofilm, and impossible cleaning. Use smooth pipe only. If you want active pull, add an inline EC duct fan in the 25 to 38 watt range near the interior end. A basic fan costs $28 to $54. 20 feet of 4-inch SDR 35 usually runs $38 to $46. Screens, a cap, fittings, mastic, and filter media add another $22 to $61. Even with the fan, you stay around $88 to $161 for a one-room prototype. Drill the wall high, not low, and terminate into a simple register or plenum box. Keep the first interior run under 8 feet if you can. On a 95-degree day, with soil holding near 55 degrees, expect supply air in the 71 to 76-degree range once the line stabilizes. In a shaded 180 to 260 square foot room, that can shave 8 to 12 degrees off the feeling of the space. Pair it with ceiling fans, closed blinds, and a night purge through opposite windows. Do not ask the pipe to cool a house that leaks like a screen porch in full sun. First, kill the obvious heat gain. Shade the west glass. Seal the attic hatch. Stop the noon blast before you celebrate the underground line. The Amish never use one answer alone. That is the deeper lesson here. Small thermal winds stack faster than expensive mechanical heroics. The whole job fits in one Saturday morning if the trench already exists, or one full weekend if you dig by hand. Maintenance is simple. Check the screen and filter once a season. Flush and inspect the run once a year. If you build a deeper manifold later, add a condensate tee and clean out at the low point. Your conventional central air costs $7,400 to $14,800 to install, $148 to $312 per month to run in hard summer, and lasts 12 to 18 years before it ends up in a landfill. This costs $88 to $161 total. It lasts 25 to 40 years. Your choice. Everything I have covered across this channel, root cellar cooling, rainwater laundry, and no-grid food storage, I have put it all in one place. Step by step, season by season, room by room, in the order the families actually use it. I have not named it yet. Link is in the description. But stay here, because what Eli built is the part nobody is talking about yet. If you are the kind of person who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. Hit subscribe. Not for me. For what comes next. Because this is not a channel. This is a quiet movement of people who have decided they are done being sold what they already own. I want to hear from you. Drop your state, your worst summer electric bill, or the cooling trick your grandfather swore by in the comments. I read every single one. Your answers decide what we cover next. If you try this line, tell me your soil, your depth, your pipe length, and your inlet temperature. I want real numbers from real yards. I want to see what changes in red clay, river loam, limestone country, and desert sand. That is how lost knowledge comes back. One test, one comment, one working build at a time. Next week, I am going to show you what a 1946 Penn State document reveals about keeping a house cooler with nothing but lime wash, shade, and moving air. The technique uses nothing but hydrated lime, borax, and muslin cotton. And the report from 1946 that proves the Department of Agriculture knew about it 80 years before telling you. You are not going to want to miss that one.